to reconnect? Good. Okay, live. Well, welcome everyone to the Parenting the Selfie Generation's special presentation on LGBTQ, understanding the rewards and challenges of youth finding their identity. First of all, I want to point out a couple of things for people who are watching from home. We are asking for you to text or voicemail any questions you have to the phone number listed here in front. It's also listed on the top of the Facebook page. And then also, folks in the audience, if you'd rather text your questions, you're welcome to do it that way too, although we welcome live questions, definitely. Also, we invite everyone please to like the Ridgefield, or the Project Resilience Facebook page, because that keeps you up to date on different events that we'll be hosting in the future, which we have lots of really wonderful plans for. So let me introduce our guest. Michaela Scully's passion for clinical work and commitment to social justice can easily be seen in her work with the mental health, substance abuse, eating disorder, and LGBTQ communities. She currently works full-time at Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan, working with multi-diagnostic residential patients with eating disorders. Previously, Michaela worked on the adult dual diagnosis detox unit, treating substance abuse disorders as well as co-occurring psychiatric disorders. She has also worked on the acute care unit of the hospital, the adolescent unit, and in the dual transition living programs. In this role, Michaela provides group therapy, individual therapy, treatment care coordination, and family work. Michaela is also working to improve policy and create training for staff on LGBTQ clinical competencies within the hospital. At the Triangle Center in Norwalk, Fairfield County's only LGBTQ center, Michaela works as a part-time peer support group facilitator for transgender, genderqueer, and gender questioning youth groups. Finally, Michaela has a small private practice in New Canaan where she focuses primarily on LGBTQ clientele. Michaela graduated from Columbia University School of Social Work with her MSW in May of 2013. Her concentration of study was in advanced clinical practice of health, mental health, and disability. Michaela also has a Bachelor's of Science in Social Work from Syracuse University, making her a seasoned participant in this field of study. So I invite you to please welcome Michaela Scully.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. You guys are so social media savvy. I think you're all actually a part of the selfie generation yourself, so that's interesting. So first I'm going to say that I'm disappointed that my font is not the same, that it was on my computer, because fonts are very important to me. But we'll go ahead anyway. So I wanted to call this Understanding the Challenges and Rewards of Youth Finding Their Identity, because that's really exactly what it is. It doesn't always have to be just something that is difficult, that is a quote-unquote issue. It is so rewarding as well, and I'm so glad that all of you are here and are interested in this. I do want to ask first, and I know that I'm not going to get answers from the people who are watching online, but out of the people who are here in the audience, I'm going to ask you 1 through 4, and raise your hand at each if you're open to doing so. 1 is, I know absolutely nothing about this topic. 2 is, I know a little bit about this topic, but I'm really eager to learn more. 3 is, I'm pretty competent in this topic, and I know really a lot about it. 4 is, I could do this presentation. So, all of y'all maybe 4. All right, 1. Okay, 2. Awesome. 3. 4. No, that's really helpful to me because, I mean, everybody's at a different level, and, some of the things I say are probably going to be, very repetitive for some people, and some of the things I say are going to be reminders, and oh yeah, and some things are going to be 100% new for other people. So I do want everybody to be at least on the same page as much as we can, so we'll do our best. So objectives, so I really want everyone here to leave with at least an introductory to LGBT terminology. If I turn around and you ever can't hear me, please tell me. And have an understanding between the differences of gender identity, gender expression, and sexual identity. I want to make sure everybody leaves knowing that. Be able to hopefully identify biases, fears, and misinterpretations surrounding individuals' expression of either gender identity or sexual identity, including but not limited to expected social behavior, sexual behavior, and attraction. And then hopefully demonstrate some knowledge on issues unique to this population and how we can support those we love and others in the community. Okay, so terms. The reason I put this image at the top is because I think first and foremost, everybody would like to acknowledge that we are all human. And at the same time, it doesn't mean that we don't have individual challenges that deserve attention, rights, etc. So LGBTQ, acronym used to describe the sexual and gender minority population. That particular acronym includes lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning individuals. This is the most widely used, acronym at this point, but it's important to understand that it's not all inclusive. Not everybody feels heard by using that, but most of us are relatively comfortable with that being used, knowing that absolutely every identity cannot fit in all of the letters. Like we've, for the most part, come to accept that that's okay. We can tolerate that. And some people also might be very, feel very left out by that at the same time. So I certainly don't speak for every single person. Additional appropriate terms or synonyms for the LGBT community, depending on the individual, include sexual or gender minority population. I use this one a lot, but it does sound kind of clinical. And that's what's used more in research and things like that. The queer community, this is okay to say. Columbia and Syracuse have had queer studies majors and minors for the last at least 2 decades, so it's not like it's this, I know it has a significant history, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but by referring to the queer community as the queer community, it's pretty much all widely accepted at this point. I just wouldn't call someone queer unless I knew that they identified that way. It's probably your safest bet. Or the gay community if someone identifies in that way. All right, so we'll start. See what happened? Sorry. So, all right, sexual orientation. I think a lot of people don't, you guys can help me with this later, but I think a lot of people don't even usually use the term sexual orientation. It's more sexual identity. Yes, no, maybe yes. Okay. But basically that's one's physical or emotional attraction to another person on the spectrum of attraction. So one of the most important things that I want you to walk away with is the next thing that I'm about to say, which is identity, attraction, and behavior are 3 very separate things, okay? So what is attraction? Attraction is something that is largely out of our control, but making sense of it is usually affected by socialization, self-awareness, and labeling oneself, which is identity, and then acting upon it, which is behavior, is up to, obviously, the individual's discretion. But someone can identify in a certain way and behave in another. Plenty of people know their identity before they've even ever engaged in sexual behavior. 40% of men who have sex with men identify as straight, and there's a whole lot behind that we can talk about. There's still a lot of homophobia, biphobia, internalized homophobia that leads to that, so identity certainly does not define behavior. And then there's a lot of people along the spectrum of attraction, but if we don't act out on those behaviors, they might not feel like identity is necessary as putting a label on that. So I put this down here, the word sex, because I think part of the reason that people are still so uncomfortable with talking about this topic is we don't call it romantic orientation. It has the word sex in it. And we're really scared of that. This country at least is still pretty scared of that. Hopefully we're getting better. But if it was called something else, maybe this wouldn't be quite as difficult for some, but I think there's implications in that word for people automatically in our heads that leads us to believe, oh my gosh, that means this person's having sex, or this is what's happening, and that's just not necessarily the case right away, or even ever for some. So yeah, it's led to a lot of over-sexualization of the community when, you know, that's not all that it's about at all. Okay, a few types of sexual minority identities. I'm assuming all of you at least know the first three. Lesbian, woman attracted to a woman, gay, man attracted to a man. Women also use this term, and other people might use this term. Sometimes use it as an umbrella term in the past. Bisexual, a person who's attracted to both men and women. Pansexual is a person attracted to a person regardless of gender, recognizing the potential for multiple gender identities. But people who are bisexual might use that term and also recognize the potential for multiple gender identities. That's just the term that feels right for them. Asexual, absence of sexual attraction or interest in sexual activity. I had a patient in her 70s who who ended up identifying as asexual, but she had multiple like specialists tell her something was wrong with her. She had testing done about her libido and like things like that. And I said, you know, I'm not saying this is who you are, but I just want to give you this website that also describes what you're describing, and you may or may not like find it useful to you. And it was asexuality.org, and she came back to me the next day, this was when I worked on the inpatient unit, in tears, and said, no one's ever made me feel validated like this before, and made me feel like what my feelings are valid. And that was just like such an amazing feeling, because she only ever engaged in sexual activity, you know, to have her children or to please her husband, but it was never anything she had any interest in, and there was nothing going on with her physically, that was just who she was. And it's, you know, it just has to do with variation, human variation, and that is a normal thing. And so that was just like a really cool moment that I had that I like to share with people, because it's real. Queer, we'll talk about that. I got a whole slide for that. Sexual identity versus gender identity, these are two separate things, two very separate things. They are interrelated. Obviously, we use gender to help us understand sexual orientation, but they're very separate things. And that can become confusing because they're all in the same acronym, right? Why did I put this down here? Okay, so I started talking about heterosexism because it's something that's important for you guys to know about, the belief in the superiority of heterosexuality over other sexual orientations, which is something that's pretty ingrained in American society, and basically systemic privilege of a heterosexual person while oppressing the LGBT community. And it basically creates this culture of being straight is the normal thing, naturalizes being straight. And so when people express different gender identities or sexualities, we do things like, who's the girl in the relationship? Or who's the man in the relationship? It's like, what? That's not, it's kind of the nature of our agreement that there isn't a man here. I don't, you know, it's hard to, but because of this idea of heterosexism or heteronormativity, like that's how our brains are functioning. And it's not how our brains are wired, it is taught. So that's just something to be mindful of. The genderbread person. You guys know the y'all know the genderbread person.
I think we have a gender unicorn.
Gender unicorn. I got you. Okay, there's both. There's gender unicorn and genderbread person. I like the genderbread person and the gender unicorn just because it's a helpful aid. It's a useful aid. So it says up at the top, gender is one of those things that everyone thinks they understand, but most people don't, like Inception. Gender isn't binary. It's not an either or. In many cases, it's both and. A bit of this, a dash of that, but then it's like it's a cookie. And if this tasty little guide is meant to be an appetizer for gender understanding, it's okay if you're hungry for more. In fact, that's the idea. And actually, the website, it's pronounced Metrosexual, has a ton of different resources on it. The reason it's called that is this whole this concept and the whole movement was created by a guy who is a straight white male, and he was always people always thought he was gay from how he dressed and how he talked and how he behaved. And he then started to do research on this. He's like, why? What is that? I'm a straight man. I'm not offended, but I'm curious. Why is it, what is happening that people are making this assumption? And what it had to do with was his gender expression. How we carry ourselves, how we speak, how we dress, how you hold your hands. We attribute to masculinity versus femininity. And so there were times where he presented in that way that was more of a feminine nature, and the idea that that was associated with gay is a whole other thing. But, because it's, but the idea that people tend to want to put us into boxes. If I see something that seems different or gender ambiguous or sexuality ambiguous, like our brains just want to figure it out. We want to put it in a box because that'll make us feel safe. That is a biologically ingrained thing, that if there's something I don't understand, it could be dangerous. This isn't dangerous. And we just have to notice when that happens, right? Like people just have to notice that, oh, there's something that I don't understand. Like, that's a fear response. Let me be curious instead. I wish that happened more. However, we're working on it, right? So, gender expression, the outward presentation. Sex is our femaleness or maleness. So it's the physical characteristics you're born with and develop, including genitalia, body shape, voice, pitch, hormones, body hair, chromosomes. We'll talk more about that. I've got slides on those. So attraction, I like how they added sexually attracted and romantically attracted, because you can be sexually attracted to, women's, females, or femininity, and then not romantically attracted, or, vice versa. And I also like that they put femininity because that might not be attributed to a woman, that could just be attributed to femininity. And also notice that there are 2 prongs for these. They're not on a spectrum of male on this side and female on this side, which is kind of how we used to conceptualize it. It's more where all of us are somewhere along the spectrum on what is this kind of socially considered maleness or femaleness, and we're all kind of, and sometimes it changes day to day, especially when it comes to gender expression. Like there are many people who don't present in day to day as feminine as they might on another day, or etc. So biological sex, it has a spectrum such as this because there are people who have a combination of both. So we'll talk about that. Gender expression, and then gender identity. Again, you're somewhere along this spectrum. And then when you guys go to the website later, you can see some of the examples that they gave over there too. All right, so let's start with sex and gender. So sex, I love this. I get all Monty Python people. It says, is it a boy or a girl? I think it's a little early to start imposing roles on it, wouldn't you? And that is the whole thing, right? Like we attach gender to what we see in someone's genitalia, and if it's ambiguous, we have a really hard time, and historically people really wanted to fix that, and that's happened to a lot of people. We used to call people who are intersex hermaphrodites. But now we use the term intersex, and that describes an individual whose sexual or reproductive anatomy are not considered traditionally male or female. The total number of people whose bodies differed from standard male or female is 1 in 100 births. That's a lot. There's a lot of intersex people out there. There's a lot of intersex people who might not even know that they're intersex, and then they find out later in life. Could be just with chromosomes, could be with parts of their body that have not actually been found until other medical complications occur. So there's a lot of different versions of what intersex means. And unfortunately there have been people who, their organs have been changed and surgically changed in childhood or at birth because, and it's purely cosmetic. So what the current and what I think appropriate recommendation is to let somebody kind of grow into their gender identity, and if they so choose that they would like to have some sort of surgery, as long as it's not like someone's at a safety risk or they can function, then they would make some sort of choice on their physical self, because you could make the wrong choice. And then that would be difficult. But our sex is, helps us right now to assign gender at birth by visualizing genitalia, because for the most part, percentage-wise, we do get it right, but we don't always get it right. So that's important too. Like, this person might not end up being the gender that we thought they were. Gender identification, when self-identified gender as male, female, or gender queer. There's variations of that as well. This identification for many coincides with their assigned gender at birth, but for some it doesn't. So those individuals would be transgender, genderqueer. Sex is a component of gender, not a determinant. I really like this art project by Coco Lane, and it just shows a really cool variation of gender expression. So at the top, they're showing a much more masculine presentation. At the bottom, they're showing a much more feminine presentation, and just all of the, all of the spaces in between. So it's just very interesting that what someone might look at one towards the middle and say, would I look at that person and think that they were feminine, think that they were masculine, think that they were male, think that they were female? So it's just an interesting project that I thought I'd add. So gender expression, characteristics in appearance, personality, behavior, culture, defined as masculine, feminine, or androgynous, which is a combination of the two. It could be in alignment, our gender expression, how we express ourselves on the outside, could be in alignment with our identity. Like, I identify as male, so I want to present as masculine, but it doesn't always. It could also just be for comfort, for pleasure, for creativity. People are creative with gender expression all the time, inside and outside of the LGBTQ community. Gender nonconforming or gender non-binary refers to someone whose manifestation of their gender identity does not really coincide with the socially expected expression of gender roles. And if someone identified as gender non-binary or gender nonconforming, I'd want to know what it meant for them. I would ask them, like, well, what does that mean for you specifically? Because people really do have their own understandings of why that term describes them and why that term feels good for them. Transgender, it's an umbrella term for individuals that have gender identity that's not typically associated with their biological sex or assigned gender at birth. The alternative to that is cisgender. So transgender is to cisgender as what we used to say homosexuality is to heterosexuality. I don't really use the term homosexuality, do you? God, no? Yeah. I don't for historical purposes, because it used to be in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders, and so that's like, it skeeves me out. Some people, so I get really skeevy. Some people do still use it. If they use it, like, I would use it. Like, if a patient of mine said that they identified as homosexual, then I would use it, but otherwise, like, I stay away from it. People are like, oh, well, isn't it the more proper way? I'm like, not. You're actually at risk of possibly offending somebody, so I don't think it's like the more proper way. But yes, cisgender is that means you identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. So I would say that I identify as a cis female. Transition, the steps that a trans individual might take, or a genderqueer individual, might take to present as their identified gender or not assigned gender at birth. This might include solely outer gender expression, medical transition, like gender-affirming surgeries, like hormone therapies, puberty blockers, etc. M to F and F to M are kind of more like medical terms. I don't use them as much unless someone else uses them. Like if someone said that they were trans, I wouldn't automatically go, oh, are they M to F or are they F to M? Which is like always the question, and like that's not all of the possible answers. Because someone might identify as genderqueer and they're going from genderqueer to genderqueer. Their body feels better in whatever steps they're taking. So that's not the question. I know you think you're sounding like You know some stuff, but it's not the question anymore. Two-spirit is the Native American, American First Nation term for those who blend masculinity and femininity. These individuals have historically been accepted and often revered in Native communities for their cross of gender boundaries. And there are like the equivalent of trans or two-spirit in so many different populations around the world, and it's existed for as long as we've existed, and I'll talk more about that too. Chosen name, the name that an individual, usually a trans person, has given themselves that more accurately expresses their gender identity rather than using their given name, which they were given at birth that coincides with their assigned gender at birth. Some people have asked me before, like, well, why do they want to change their name? It's like a pretty gender neutral name, but it might remind them of the person that they aren't anymore, too. So it's not just about the name. Sometimes it's very significant about actually making a transition in your life. Some people call the gender that they were assigned at birth their dead name, too. So that's also another thing that you might hear. Pronouns. Always use a pronoun as a person indicates that they would like to use. He, she, or they. There are others, but not as many others are actually used. I'd say they is pretty much the general gender neutral pronoun. I try to use it as much as possible and not assume really anybody's gender. Also, it's like really good practice because like everybody else, I had to practice using singular they. But if you think about it, the easiest way to think about it is if you don't know the gender of someone in conversation, or you don't know the gender of somebody's baby or somebody's dog, you say, oh, what's their name? We rarely say, like, what's his or her name? Mm-hmm. Like, it does come out naturally, we're just not used to using it in certain contexts. So it's just the easiest, probably most inclusive. And most people are not offended if you ask them what pronouns they use. Some people will just be confused if they've never heard that. But more often than not, if someone presents as more gender ambiguous, they'll probably be like grateful that you cared enough to ask. You know, not like, can't you tell that I'm blank? That doesn't, do you, right? Yeah, okay. They're so good. They're so helpful. I haven't been in high school in a while, so, I mean, I know it probably doesn't matter, but. We also have a new prefix, which is mix, MX. So this is we're gonna start seeing this in more places. Instead of just Miss, Mr., Mrs., MX is a gender neutral option that we are gonna start having, which is cool. So yeah, this, you know, if someone's using a different name, this should be respected, even if their legal name, of course, has not been changed. Sometimes people are trying on names for size, and it doesn't have to be like this be-all, end-all, this is the biggest deal in the world, because if someone's just trying it on and wants to see how it feels, they just want to see how it feels, and that is totally encouraged and you know, encouraged. I'll just leave it there. Queer. Here's the queer slide. There's two, actually. Queer is a reclaimed, self-affirming term used for those who fall outside of either the gender or sexuality norm. So someone could use it in reference to their gender, someone could use it in reference to their sexuality, or both. With different definitions depending on the context. So it's an umbrella term used to describe the entirety of this sexual and gender minority community. The queer community, widely recognized now, as I've mentioned. Excuse me. It could also mean an individual's sexual orientation that they do not feel neatly fits within one of the other categories. Or sometimes it's just kind of nice to like not have to tell people your business. You're like, yeah, I'm queer. If you need more information, like I'll talk to you about it, but you don't really need more information if I don't want to tell you, or it just feels right. It just feels like the right one out of the options we have. And I know there are tremendous amounts of options that we have, but if someone says one of those terms and you don't know what it is, it's okay to ask. No one's going to say, like, how could you not know that? How dare you? You don't know any, no, I don't think people do that. People don't do that. Or just asking, oh, so what does that mean to you? Or how did you come to understand that about yourself? Totally okay questions. On gender, also used when identifying one's gender, like genderqueer, for those who feel their gender identity does not neatly fit within the socially deemed male or female categories. I really love, love, love this cartoon. It's like one of my favorites ever. Are you a boy or a girl? No. So good, so good. Again, appropriate when discussing someone's identity to ask them what queer means to them. It's a word that allows for self-definition. Let's see. Obviously, we're going to remain mindful that it does still have the possibility of a controversial nature for sexual and gender minorities, primarily for those later in life who have experienced the word queer in a derogatory sense. But the most important thing is how you use it, how it's directed towards someone. If I say like, ugh, look at that lesbian, you just made it derogatory. Look at that queer, you made it derogatory. Say, oh, they identify as queer because you know that they use that term, not derogatory. Oh, they identify as a lesbian because you know they use that term, not derogatory. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. Understanding the self. Even if someone's description of themselves falls into one of these terms, it does not mean they identify with the term. There are multiple reasons for that. They don't know the term. They choose not to identify with the term if they know that term. That's fine. That's okay. It's like, well, you like girls, and you only like girls, and you're a girl, so you're a lesbian. That's who you are. It doesn't have to be so imposed, right? Again, we like to put people in boxes. That makes us feel safe. That makes us feel comfortable. That person might want to explore if that term feels right for them. They might just not want to use labels at all. Although for me, especially as a clinician, I often kind of want to be mindful if it ever has anything to do with internalized homophobia. Are they not identifying because they're like, oh, I'm just someone who doesn't like labels? Or are they not identifying because there's shame attached to that? So that's just something that I'm often mindful of. An individual can identify or not identify however they feel comfortable and with whatever empowers them. Labels are helpful because it can help empower us. I mean, really, if you looked at the genderbread person, we are all on that spectrum, right? Some of us are just further on some side, right? So even the need for the acknowledgement of the LGBTQ community might not be so significant in our future. However, right now, in our historical, political, whatever climate, this needs and deserves to be acknowledged because there are rights that people aren't getting, there's respect that people aren't getting, there's different needs that the community has. So it's important for now. Attentiveness to the LGBTQ community shouldn't only apply for those of us who are already told us they're not heterosexual or cisgender. We don't want to feel like we can predict someone. So like you wouldn't walk up to somebody and just assume the gender of their partner, hopefully. You wouldn't say like, oh, your husband, right? And like, because they might have a wife, or they might not even be married. Like we never, like we just want to not assume. So basically for anyone, whether they're young, old, whatever it might be, just not assuming anything about their gender identity, their sexuality, their behavior, just being unassuming and non-judgmental, really, just having an openness. Also with understanding the self, sometimes people might not know because they haven't been in an environment that is allowed for self-exploration as well, so that could be part of it. Oh, this is about, and I heard you all talking about the word guys before, and I use the word you guys all the time, and I'm like trying not to, but I also still like it too, and we're talking about that. But this is just like being aware of like when you walk up to a group of people that you might not actually know everybody's gender identity in that group of people, like, hey ladies, like that might feel like a waiter comes up and does that, but like all the people in the party are like, you know, so there are other options. I use y'all a lot, which I don't think is on here, and people are like, are you Southern? I'm like, no. It's just one of the only gender neutral options we have, and I like it. That's true. I use folks too, and I think a lot of queer folks use the word folks, which we're bringing it back, folks. So that's just something to be mindful of. Question that is often asked, I think, by well, I was gonna say parents, but pretty much everybody, are there more queer people now than ever? They seem to be popping up everywhere, like weeds. This is unlikely. It's unlikely that there are more LGBTQ people. We've always existed. However, people now have more language and more resources to easily understand their experiences with gender, attraction, or sexuality. Therefore, more people may be identifying as a part of the community more than ever, but I highly doubt there's actually more of us. If you ask my uncle, he thinks it's like, a part of reducing population. He's like, we're naturally evolving this way for population control. I'm like, we don't have proof of that, but I don't know, maybe, I don't. So there's theories, but we don't have any proof of that, I don't know, so. There's also now more of an openness and a curiosity about ourselves and our life experience, our human experience, that is now expanding culturally. So that is allowing for it as well. Can someone make someone else queer? Absolutely not. Again, nope. Are you sure? No. So someone might be exposed to someone who is in the queer community, but that cannot make them feel feelings that are not there. It's not going to happen that way. Questioning and exploration of sexual and gender identities is a natural phenomenon, and as long as it's done safely, should be supported. So a lot of people in the LGBT community used to wait until they left the house to come out, because they could be in college, they could, they didn't have to worry about their family's opinions. Maybe they never even had to tell their family if they didn't want to. But now, because of all of the resources that we have, people earlier and earlier, especially because of the internet, are realizing like, oh, that's me. Like they see a definition or they see a person and they're like, whoa, that's who I am. Not that before we didn't know what gay people were, we didn't know what trans people were, or anything like that. It's just, it was so hush-hush. It's not hush-hush anymore. It's okay. Yet, at the same time, the rate of LGBTQ youth homelessness is higher than it has ever been recorded, ever. And that's because kids are feeling more and more comfortable coming out earlier and earlier, but parents and other adults haven't evolved along with them, so they're still getting kicked out at higher and higher rates. So a huge, huge, huge population of the homeless youth population is LGBTQ, even though they take up a much smaller rate of the overall population. So that's very hard. So people ask me over and over, oh, it's getting better, everything's getting better. I'm like, yes and no. So it's more complicated than that. I just wanted you to know what these things were. Homophobia, the irrational fear or hatred of gay people or people in the queer community, or any behavior or belief that doesn't conform to this like rigid sex role or stereotype. It's fear that enforces sexism as well as heterosexism. So homophobia is a huge problem also just for women and in feminism, like, oh, you're so gay because you're doing something usually what? Feminine, right? Because for some reason women are seen as less than, so if you are expressing yourself in a way that is feminine, it just must mean that you're gay, which is so silly to me. Biphobia, the fear or discrimination against, hatred of bisexuals, which is often related to the current binary standard. So biphobia can be seen within the LGBT community as well as the heterosexual or cis community. So that's really hard. People who are bisexual are not fully accepted by either community, which is really tough, and it's similarly equated to, people who might be biracial, or, it's different because it's invisible. However, there's a similarity there that where do I ever truly feel like I belong? So someone should be hopefully made that they feel like they belong wherever they are. Some people say things like, oh, it must be easier because you can, if you're a female, oh, you can just be with a man and that's going to be easier. I hear that so often, I hear that all the time, and really like what your loved one or someone in that position wants to hear is, I'm gonna love you no matter what or who you end up with, because someone doesn't choose what's easier socially. Someone will be with who they fall for, and I'd like to think, in Dr. Seuss's words, those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. And I know that there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of worry about, well, if something could be easier for someone, why wouldn't they want to make it easier? But being yourself will forever be the easiest way to go through life, is to just feel genuine and just feel like you are being yourself. So I feel like that's important to say. Monosexism is similar to biphobia, the idea that being exclusively gay or exclusively straight is superior to bisexuality. Like, why would you want to be, that's so much more complicated. Or that person's just overly sexual, or that, you know, you can be gay, but you can't be bisexual. That's that whole idea. Transphobia, the irrational fear that those who are gender variant or of those who are gender variant, or the ability to deal with gender ambiguity. So if you see somebody and you like can't understand like how they're presenting themselves, and you just like cannot tolerate that. And I think there's a lot of people who have that, like I mentioned, that like a little bit of discomfort, maybe not used to it, but just look at that with curiosity. Internalized homophobia, biphobia, transphobia is the irrational fear or hatred of oneself for their status as an individual who's a part of this community. They might force themselves to be in rigid roles, conform to things that don't feel natural or comfortable. This is not the same, however, as hiding gender expression from families due to safety or fear. If someone is hiding because they're not in a safe environment, they're doing that for safety reasons, and that's a different thing. That doesn't mean that they don't like themselves. That means that they might be in an environment that doesn't allow for it. One of the greatest ways to combat internalized homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia is to normalize all of these things as much as possible. There may be fewer people in the world who identify this way, and it's variations, human variation. On trans folks, 1 out of 4, this is like, we have very little research, but we do have some. 1 out of 4 children with the presentation of being trans, meaning either they say that they're a gender that they weren't assigned at birth, or they like really like hyper gravitate towards things that are not like a part of their assigned gender at birth, like toy-wise or dress or play, end up having that continue into adulthood. And I think that same study said another 2 of the 4 will end up being somewhere in the LGBT community, and then another 1 of that 4th will just be cis heterosexual people. So, you know, you never know. On a very feminine to very masculine scale, like our own standard deviation for someone who doesn't identify as transgender, like we will deviate to like towards some more feminine things if you're male, towards some more masculine things if you identify as female. They like categorize that as like 3 to 5. Someone who is assigned male will have, as a trans child, but feel very feminine, will have a standard deviation of 7 to 12. So that means like a trans woman is more female than me internally for some reason. We need much more research, but it's not like a child actually tries to say like, I need to prove that I'm female, let me go to all the pink stuff. Like they don't know to do that. It just is. It just is something happening for them. And that's just so fascinating to me. A male child who says, I must be a girl because only girls do these things, is not actually evidence of being transgender, but is showing evidence of sexism, right? We are allowed to have boys do some girl things or girls do some boy things. We certainly don't categorize gender just by what people are interested in. So when it comes to trans teens ending up actually staying trans throughout adulthood, one of the studies that we have, and again, we don't have many, Out of 70 trans adolescents, 100% of those 70 trans adolescents continued with that gender identity. So they identified as trans in adolescence, they remained trans. Because people always ask, what if they're not sure? By adolescence, you're pretty sure. You're pretty sure. It's pretty safe at that point. And again, questioning and exploration is okay. Just because someone's questioning or exploring doesn't mean like this is definitely what's happening for this person. I would say that everybody questions gender. Everybody questions sexuality. But sometimes it's like, do I like boys? No. That was your questioning. That was it. But for some people, it lasts years. So the questioning is a normal thing. That is okay. But when someone's like, yes, I am certain that this is what I am, like, we should believe them. And we should allow for, the more we suppress, the more and don't allow for that exploration, for someone to end up in the place that feels safe for them when it comes to identity and either gender or sexuality, the more likely there is for psychological harm. And these are the studies done on psychological harm for people who don't come from accepting families. So family rejection and risk for suicide. So this was a lifetime suicide attempts by LGBTQ young adults rejected by families in adolescence. Low rejection rate, that was the percentage. Moderate rejection rate, and as you can see, many more suicides for high rejection rate. So, and this wasn't just suicides in adolescence, this was throughout someone's entire life, but the rejection happened in adolescence. So that's super important. Family acceptance during adolescence and perceptions of being a happy adult. For people who had acceptance during adolescence, only 35% of those people rated themselves as happy adults. Whereas for the people who felt like they had accepting families, 92% rated themselves happy adults. So I do believe that people can come out of very difficult family situations and still thrive in their lives. However, it is a tremendously preventative thing to not be someone who is a non-accepting family member. It's very preventative. It's also preventative for depression, illegal drug use, unprotected sex, and risk for contracting HIV. Family rejection has a direct correlation to all of those. So I feel like these are super important. Challenges and rewards. Since this is the title, I figured I should probably put this in here. Challenges. There's a lot more, I think there's a lot more challenges and rewards than just this slide, by the way. But I thought that these were some points. The fear or the actuality of being misunderstood. Discrimination, which is often one of the ones that I think leads to well-meaning families wanting to suppress what someone is experiencing. Like, well, they can't do X, Y, and Z because they're going to be discriminated against, right? Like, that's well-meaning. I understand that it's well-meaning. And there's always going to be someone in this world that doesn't like us. Like, let's not have you, the person in my household, be the person who's coming off that way, right? Fear and loss, losing friends, or fear of the unknown, not knowing if certain people might understand when I'm coming out, things like that. Self-doubt and minority stress, which is this idea that there is an increased likelihood of depression, anxiety, and other things for people who are treated differently for a minority status. So that is something that can be challenging. But again, there's a lot of protective factors. I would say the rewards are much greater. So having pride in your true self, having a sense of community, feeling heard, feeling understood, and feeling love. How do I help? Be humble. Each person's journey is different. Cultivate a non-judgmental and unassuming attitude. Listen and validate someone's experience, right? You might not understand it, but talk to them about what that experience is and say, you know, I might not understand what that feels like, but I understand that this is what you're feeling right now, and that this feels real for you. Also, never, like, tell someone what their gender or sexual orientation is. Like, there are some people who will say, like, oh, I always knew that you were gay, or like, no, you're gay, you're like, come on, but you don't want to do that. You really want to wait until somebody's ready to understand it themselves. If you really feel like you're super sure that you know someone's gender or sexual orientation that they haven't shared with you, the best way to approach that is to not say anything directly, but like make subtle hints about other things that show how supportive you are. And then they'll be like, oh, like this person, like when I'm ready, I can tell them. That's the best thing that you can do. Like, you see something on TV, just be like, don't you love the LGBT community? Like, I don't know. That was a really terrible example, but you understand the premise, like creating that safe space for when they are ready. And again, we could be totally wrong, but sometimes we're right. Allowing for exploration and creativity with gender expression and all kinds of identity. A book that I like about this, and I know we're going to talk about some resources later, this is a book for the parents of gay kids. And it's not just about gay, it's about everybody in the community, but it's a great, I think it is a funny title. Just allow for it, you know, allow for people to express themselves in a way that, you know, might be scary for you, but might be necessary for them. And as long as they feel safe, like especially if it's just in your home, you know, like that's okay. Because if it's a safe space at home and then it doesn't end up being something they continue with, like they tried that on, now they know. If someone feels really suppressed, like they can't even try something, that creates such tremendous guilt, shame, which can lead to depression, further anxiety, things like that. So allowing for safe spaces. Ask yourself, is what I'm about to say going to potentially help or harm this relationship? Like, are you sure? Like, that a lot of doubt. There's something you could say instead of are you sure is, tell me about that experience. Tell me how you've come to understand who you are. Tell me about how you've come to understand. Like, I just want to learn about that. Are you sure just seems like really condescending and like you don't believe the person. Even if that's not the intent, right? Intent versus outcome. The intent can be very different than the outcome, so just try and think about how could that maybe be heard. Educating yourself and supporting yourself and your family, books, internet, PFLAG. PFLAG is the parent and family organization for gays and lesbians, but they've never changed their name. They're very inclusive though. At the Triangle Community Center, where I run my group on for transgender and gender questioning and genderqueer youth, PFLAG goes on at the same time, and actually most of the people in PFLAG, I'd say, probably have trans kids or gender questioning kids, because people are having a little bit of an easier time, I think, with sexuality these days, but that's not to say that that's the case for everybody, certainly. So that's a really great resource. Becoming a visible ally. I try to be visible, like somehow show people that you actually care about this or fight for things that make sense to you to fight for. Let's see, become a visible ally, ask how you would be a good ally to specific people, and advocate for issues surrounding this, okay? That's it. I think we have, thanks. I think we're gonna bring up Tyler, Sarah, Lynn, and Mia as well from our local GSA, which is Gender and Sexuality Alliance at the high school, and you'll be able to ask me and them questions. So everyone come on.
And we have questions to generate.
Oh, cool. Cool. And then questions from y'all who are here as well. Y'all.
So do you want me to start with the first question?
Sure. Good with standing, that's, or do you wanna bring chairs up, or up to you? You're, okay, don't sit then, you do you. They wanna sit, that's good, okay. What's the first
So the
question?
first question was, I'm not a fast texter, but this is about the family acceptance slide. What happens with the suicide rate when one parent accepts and the other doesn't?
I don't, that's a beautiful question. I don't think we have statistics specifically on, one parent versus the other, but I will say that, just from experience, that having at least one parent is far more protective than having none who are accepting. I've experienced a lot of the kids that I work with, they feel safe in themselves knowing that at least one figure in their life is understanding and accepting, and it's a little bit easier to say like, okay, maybe dad or mom or whoever it is will come around later, right? I think that that's helpful. And I think they're able to realize that there's going to be people in my life who are going to have a really hard time with this, who may take longer, might never accept, but there are also going to be people who love me and care for me exactly who I am. So I do think that at least having one is certainly still protective. Yeah, I don't know, do you guys have anything to add from friends who have dealt with this or experience or?
I'll add something. So just like, I know, from like people I know and stuff, that having at least one parent that does support, like sometimes that one parent will help like deal with the other parent that doesn't support them, or like that one parent will kind of curb the other parent and talk to them to protect their child, and it does make a huge difference when at least one parent is supportive, even if the other isn't.
Also kind of off that, like what you're talking about with, even if it's just like knowing other people might not be supportive, it's like good sometimes to know like my immediate family is really supportive, even to know like I might not ever come out to extended family or certain members of extended family, but to know that I have a really supportive immediate family is really, really helpful, and it's just like, makes me feel happy inside.
I'm so glad you added that, because I think that, do you want to say something too? Yeah.
I've got nothing else to add.
I'm really glad you added that, because I think that there are some people whose like fear and anxiety comes from like, oh my God, what is my mother, like what is their grandmother gonna say about this? And then like they hold on to that anxiety, and that anxiety is then transferred onto their child. And it's like, don't even go there. Like you can have your tight-knit, close family know that like, we love you, we support you, it's okay, don't worry about grandma for now, or like whoever it might be, And also sometimes I find people are like, oh, we're worried about the older generation. Like, I'm not, like, sometimes when people get closer to later in life, they're actually more accepting than the parental generation. Like, let them live, like, let them do their life. So you really never know how somebody's gonna react, I think. Other questions? People here?
I'm always surprised when I see middle-aged school and even high school deciding what they want to be or who they want to be attracted to. I never went through that, so I kind of say to myself, was I immature? Was I naive? Was I not looking for someone to be attracted to me? I mean, you're defining yourself right away, and you're so young. I mean, even when I went to college, it wasn't like a question like, oh, is that boy going to date me, or am I interested in that boy? I never went through that. I liked myself. I liked being who I was, whether I was wearing pants or a dress or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to define myself by what I wore.
Right.
Or who I was attracted to.
Yeah, I think that's, for some people, it's so important. You are so much further along the spectrum than just someone who's like, I prefer to wear pants or a dress. It's just like, this in my soul feels right, or it doesn't when it comes to gender. And then most people don't really deal with the kind of distress of wondering who you're attracted to if you're attracted to, you know, what we call the opposite sex, so to speak, because that's so normalized. It just doesn't, it's not something that you even do or even really think about. There's no coming out straight, like it just doesn't, because that's the normalized thing. And eventually there won't be any like coming out as gay or coming out as trans, like that won't be a thing eventually either. It'll just be like, people will not assume, and people will say like, oh, who are you dating, or who are you attracted to, or like it's not even gonna be a thing eventually, it just is still now. Do you guys have anything to add to it?
Yeah, it was funny because when I was first like introduced to like the idea of like, oh, being gay or being straight, it was like in middle school, and I had the big gay freak out because for me, I know for a lot of my classmates it was, oh, okay, that just exists. But for me it was like, oh my gosh, is that me? Like, is that a definition I might be comfortable with? And I had never thought, oh, am I attracted to girls, or am I attracted to just girls or just guys? Because, like, nobody, like, it was so normalized to like the opposite sex. And then like, as I had my big gay freak out, I was like, well, okay, well, you know, I'll wait until I see, like, is there anybody I might be looking for, particularly? And then it just kind of led into just experiencing like friendships and then romantic relationships, and just saying, oh yeah, I'm more comfortable identifying personally as bisexual. But I think part of it was just because I like was introduced to it from a young age, and it wasn't like this is something that exists. It was, oh, this could be me, and that's like what really resonated with me. So.
And like I was introduced at like a really young age, because I went to Cape Cod a lot, and we'd stop into P-Town, and so we went home and my mom gave us the whole little speech about who are gay people when I was in like 2nd grade. So I was introduced to it really early in, but I still didn't really start questioning until middle school, and at sleepaway camp. And because I was still in the girls' bunk back then, I just switched over to the boys' bunk this past summer, finally. I love my camp, it's a really good camp. So, yeah. So for me it was really once I realized that maybe it's actually something to be thinking about as opposed to just something else. It really started clicking when I realized, hang on, I'm identifying with this more than just beyond I've heard about it and I'm comfortable with it, as I started to realize that, hang on, this could potentially be me.
I think also this is probably like the more rare occasion, but like mostly if you're straight, like my understanding is you don't really need to question it. Like it's just kind of like this is what's accepted. So why would you think any different? But also, like, this is probably really weird, but for me, I just always knew, like, I'm attracted to somebody no matter, like, their gender. Like, I'm attracted to their person. So it's like, I didn't even question, like, I always knew, and then when my friends were like, my friends started coming out, and then I was like, oh, there's a term for it. So sometimes it's just, like, you inherently know, you don't really need to think about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm glad you said that. Some people go through questioning periods and then make some sort of decision, and some people are like, no, that's always been a thing, and now I found a term. That's awesome. Yeah.
Just you mentioned about how it's like deciding at a young age. I had thought about it at first. I was like, oh, well, do I really want to like come out to my family so young for the same reason of, well, you know, it's not really normal to say like, oh, is this like who you want to be for the rest of your life? But like it's all fluid. It's all gender or what? No. It's all a spectrum. So if this is who I am now, I'm comfortable with that, and I know that I have a lot of really good friends and support groups who will, if I am ever like, you know what, that's not really what defines me now, I know that I can change it.
Yeah. And it's not that you're, like, it's complicated because we have such a difficult history with being seen as valid, so people felt like, the LGBT community felt like they had to be very definitive I am gay and there's no changing that, don't try and change me, this is not a choice, da, da, da. And now we're like, there's an evolution. There are people who identify as bisexual their whole life and then later in life feel like they're gay. There are people who identify as gay and then are like, I never had this attraction until now, and I'm really thinking I'm bisexual, and that doesn't make their identity earlier in life invalid. It doesn't. Or they felt like they were straight and then later on in life they felt like they were gay. It does not mean that like the relationships they had back then were totally invalid. There are people who feel like, yes, my whole life I was hiding and I have been this way my whole life, but there are people who do not feel that way, that this was truly my experience at this time in my life, and now this is truly my experience, and that's okay. Like, this is not a black and white, it's a very, no, it's not. But yeah, but it's hard to describe that to people and then also like have this fear of, are people gonna think I'm valid still? Are people gonna think I'm legit, or are they gonna think that I'm just like trying to be cool or like have fun? It's like, no, I can't, like I don't think anyone would ever choose something that is, you have to do as much explaining for. Like, it's a lot, like it's work, man. And so I just, yeah, go ahead.
I think your presentation is just incredible, and I really applaud y'all for being out there. My son is transgender, and back when he came out and was transitioning, there was very little vocabulary available, and I think that we ask our kids they have to be warriors. They have to educate themselves really early in order to create a script for people who approach them and to protect themselves. It's a lot to ask of a young person. But I think that so many of the transgender people that I know, and the gay people that I know, are pretty evolved because they're called upon to be very evolved in this situation. I think the way my son likes to explain the difference between gender and sexual orientation is that sexual orientation is who you go to bed with, and gender is who you go to bed as. So it's just inimical to who we are. It's not a decision, it's not a choice, it's who we are. We can repress it as much as we like, but it's there. And I just didn't want to say the thing about the population growth thing that you were talking about.
Yeah, please.
That sort of the assumption is there that genderqueer people don't want to or can't reproduce or aren't interested in having kids.
Of course,
You know,
yeah.
there's that whole other thing that happens where, you know, trans people can carry children. They can choose to do that. I know people who have and do. And
Yeah,
I
gay
just
people
think-
have kids, like, of course, yeah.
Yeah,
Of course,
and
absolutely.
I just think that this is a wonderful evening, and it's the coolest thing ever, and I just feel so comforted that this community is here. It just makes me feel even better about Ridgefield.
Did you find any resources most helpful for you in terms of your own growth?
Internet. 100%. Because, actually, the incognito tab is very useful if you're like, because I still use it, because I'm still questioning like everything about me. I've gone through like a heck ton of terms at this point, and I still do use the incognito tab because I don't always want my family to know about it exactly the moment I start thinking about it, because I've gone through so many at this point. I am kind of feeling like, yeah, when am I gonna find it, sort of thing, and are people gonna accept it when I say it? I know. But so I think the internet definitely, because there's so much of a connection with people who aren't directly in your community. Because there's not a very large out community at RHS. There really isn't. There's not too many people in Ridgefield. But on the internet, we can all like clump together and talk. Or we have the internet pages where we can look it up, or plan parades, and like just find anything that we really need. Like even some of the really lesser known sexualities like wasexual, like that's a thing, and there were like maybe 2 people on the internet I found who also identify at the moment. But it's out there, and it's really nice because you can find like anything, including something that maybe you're going to identify with.
And I think it's also like not just information, it's YouTube videos, it's social networks, it's so many different pieces of it. And something I want to point out is something that always makes me super, super nervous is if I ever have like parents of patients at the hospital and they're like, we're taking away their phone. We're taking away their phone because they are staying on it all day, they're on their computer all day. If that's happening, it's not just like, sometimes it could be they're just a teenager, but also there could be like, that's the only place that they feel safe. So it's actually high risk to maybe remove somebody from the internet if that's where they spend all their time and that's the only place that they feel safe. So that is a point of curiosity and questioning and possibly getting further people involved, not necessarily immediate discipline, if that makes sense. Because it could be the safest place someone has. Yeah?
I have 2 questions if you'll allow. So one is, if you guys could discuss, I have this perception that it's harder to have what I think I had in high school, what I think I had in high school as a dating life. So I wonder how that works.
I think of what I had.
Well, you know,
I just like how you.
it wasn't a John Hughes film, but I idolized it. Could it be, you know,
Sure.
Pretty in Pink or 16 Candles or whatever? So I'm just trying to figure out, like, you know, not only is someone like looking at you and trying, like, let's say I was the lovely person on left in the red, I think you're cute. It feels like there's things to go through to know if I'm approaching you correctly, if I'm incorrect to approach you, like, and conversely, if I identify as gay, I don't know how to like go on a heat-seeking mission of who else might feel complimented or insulted. It feels complicated to me as a parent. So that my first thing. My second thing is I struggle with out. So if you're comfortable in your identification, you're kind of out. Out feels like you have to like. I don't understand it completely. Like, comfort in your own skin and your friends and family know, but does it have to be like it's related to the dating piece? Like, if it's not broadcast, how's someone gonna? I still don't get how it works.
Such a good question, first of all. I'll let you guys start.
It's really difficult because I'm transgender, sort of like non-binary, sort of still working it out, but definitely more on the male side of things. And I'm questioning my sexual orientation at the same exact time. So if I'm interested in someone, I've got absolutely no clue how to approach the situation because I don't know if this person is attracted to my really like non-specific gender / sometimes specific gender. I don't know if they're even going to like me as a person. Like, it's really all of these extra layers of having to work out if I am feeling like very masculine that day and I'm going as like fully trans male, is that person really going to be interested in dating me, and do they have to have that whole conversation with themselves about what is their identity, because it's difficult on both sides. So if you're interested in someone, and it's nice to approach them, I think. Just be careful about the terminology that you use. It's just nice to know that like there's a chance.
It feels like, as a parent, it feels scary.
Well, dating is always scary, right?
Yeah.
So, and I agree that there's these that it's layered, but I think like you never know when you approach somebody if they're going to have some sort of attraction to you. It's just like that plus a little bit more.
Yeah, it's like, I'm trying to think of like how to say this. Dating's different. It's casual dating in my experience with a lot of the people I know who identify as LGBT+, like it's not a thing. Because most times you're friends with them for a while, and then you find out, like as you're exploring your sexuality, or like, oh, maybe I want to be more than friends with them. So, and obviously this is just my personal experience, but a lot of people I know, like it's not casual dating. And when you date, and when you ask someone out, it's like, I'm really going out on a limb here because I'm making kind of a commitment. I'm not like saying like it's more serious than regular dating, but it's also not impossible. I've been in a relationship 2 years, and it like she was my friend first, but part of it is the community at RHS is actually pretty great. So I know that like if I weren't in a relationship and I were interested in a guy or a girl, and like if I really was certain that I wanted to just go for it, like just do it, then I know that there's a strong enough community, not just behind me with my friends, but just in RHS, that I wouldn't really feel afraid asking somebody out and having them use my sexuality as like a revulsion, like, oh, what, like if I asked a girl, like, oh, no, I'm not gay or something like that, I feel like it would have just been like oh, no, but like I think you're a good person, or we could be friends, but I think part of it is eased by the fact that RHS has a really, really, really understanding community with like 2 or 3 people who are like iffy, but it's fine.
It'll always happen.
In a perfect world, the way I see all of this happening is if you're LGBT and you want to date someone or you want to ask them out on a date, you go up to them and you kind of initiate conversation, and either you ask them, and if you're friends, this is not awkward, but like if you don't know them, it could be like probably awkward, but like you kind of like try to find out, like I'm interested in you, like do you want to go on a date with me, or like are you perhaps like interested in whatever gender, and if the person is, but like they don't like you, they're respectful about it, like yes I am or something, but if they do and they do like you, then yes, I'll go on a date with you. And the way I think things should go is if they're not, and they like they want to tell you this, they say like no I'm not, but like they don't do it in a rude way. They don't kind of like ridicule you for asking, or they don't say like no I'm not and thank God I'm not, or something like that. That would be bad. Like they're kind of respectful about it and they turn you down gently. But obviously that's not how things happen, so it's a little harder to like to build the courage to ask someone out. So usually in my experience, like for me and my friends, how things have happened is you know the person first, and they come out to you first, and then that gives you the courage to say, okay, I know they're LGBTs, so maybe it'll be a little easier to start something.
I think that goes back to this person's point too, and just how much like self-work and strength and resilience that you have to go through to even do this kind of self-work, really. And so community is just so important. Friendship is so important because, like you were saying, if I get rejected by somebody, it does not define me. It doesn't. And I have other people who care about me and love me no matter what. And building up self-esteem when you already feel like an other is certainly not easy to do, and it's something that I think we have to work at a little bit harder. And it's always helpful to just have people to be like, oh my God, I want to talk to this person, I don't know what to say, and just have those kinds of conversations and just have peer support. But I think your questions are so common, and I'm so glad that you said that. You're asking these things because I think that's such a common fear for parents. Like, will the person that I love the most in this world also find love? That is, it's like, it's so scary, and I do think that there are like little things that people do, like when they're in certain environments, that they're like, so do you like girls playing with you? Like there's just like people like find ways that they end up figuring out how to like figure out their environment, and it's also building your own self-confidence. So it's a bit of an exploration, and as long as you have the support behind it, I think you'll be okay.
And about the the second question, it was. Can you say it again?
Yeah, it's about understanding that IVF out.
Oh, out.
Because, if you ask me, for example, if you ask me my religion, I'm going to share it with you happily, and I'm proud, and I'll discuss it. But it's not something you can tell unless I share it with you.
Yeah, of course.
But it seems like the out concept is something like much louder and bigger and more identifiable, and I don't know if that's key. I don't understand how to exhibit that, how to do that.
I don't think it will exist. I think it will be just as what you just described about religion will be exactly, like, we do not assume everyone is the same religion. We will, in the future, not assume that everybody is of the same sexual orientation or the gender that we assume. And I think that the idea of coming out, it's like, usually it's like, I came out to my friends, I came out to my family, I'm out later because if somebody asks me, I'll tell them, similar to just your example, but not like, walked into my first day at work at Silver Hill and I was like, all right, everybody, I'm queer. But like, over time, it, you know, people come to the work I do, or like how I spoke about partners or whatever, like it started to become something known, and it didn't have to. I certainly could have kept that private, as I might imagine people keep their religion private in certain areas too. Like that's okay. But how, in my life, and I'll let you guys give your own experience, it was friends, certain friends, family, certain family, and then just coming out, so to speak, in those moments where there was a need or an opportunity is kind of how it was.
I definitely agree with that. It's very individualized. And even it depends on like why you're coming out. Like coming out for like a sexual orientation or sexual identity is going to be very different conversation from coming out as trans or genderqueer or questioning, and it's very personalized. So yeah, there's like the general like checklist people. It's like close friends. Sometimes they happen for family, and then it's family. Sometimes all of the family, sometimes not, and like part of it is like how like open you are with that. Like I have Instagram posts about me and my girlfriend, so most people who follow me on Instagram know that's part of my identity, and very few people might ask me, but that's just who I am, and a lot of my friends don't. They're not that out with it. They're not that forward, and it's just all about who they feel comfortable sharing with, which kind of ties into the concept of outing someone, which is very, very important, which is when you reveal someone else's sexual identity or any form of their LGBTQ plusness without their direct consent. And that's like why it's a very fine line about like being out is a very personal thing.
Can you describe why that's maybe different than like revealing just your religion or revealing like just like another attribute about yourself?
So like it's so different because I mean sometimes people might assume like certain things about you because of your religion. Like somebody might say like, oh, there's no good example for that. There's no example for that. It's like nice and clean cut. But it's like, okay, it's like, it's not the same as me saying I have blonde hair. Because, or like, I don't know, I like K-pop, whatever. And like, that's something about me that doesn't essentially change your perception of me directly. It's like something about me. And while religion is a little bit, it's like, well, it's like something you practice, it's something you hold dear. When somebody else reveals something so extremely personal, like your sexual orientation, which you probably don't share with everybody, it's just a huge violation of just privacy and trust. And I've been outed a couple times, and it really ruins relationships because there's just like, there's this essential change in how people treat you sometimes.
It's a violation.
It's a violation of everything you've built up with relationships, and it's not the same as religion in the sense of people might not like kick you out of your house for it. because we tend to be more religiously inclusive. It wasn't always that way, so hopefully the trend shows, outing won't always be this big thing, but
It's because there's fear attached to it.
Yeah.
It's not benign information.
yeah.
Also, just like going back to your second question, like she was saying, out is like different for every person. Sometimes it's like, putting a bumper sticker on your car, or like other times it's just like telling your friends and your family, like, by the way, I'm coming out to you. Or sometimes for other people, it's if somebody asks you, are you gay, are you bi? Out sometimes is saying, like, being able to say or being comfortable with saying, yes, I am, and being comfortable with talking about that. So it like kind of varies per person, but usually usually it's not like, somebody walks into a room and you can just tell they're gay. Like, that's not being out. It's more of like somebody's comfort level with talking about their sexuality or their gender identity and how much they want to express that.
And I think something interesting for me, being both questioning my gender and my sexuality, something I've noticed is that there really is a difference in who I'm comfortable telling about which aspect of it. So I'm more comfortable talking to my friends about my sexuality than I am with my parents. Probably because it's like sexuality and parents is like that, you get the talk and everything, and it's that whole thing. And then with your friends, it's more of like you're talking about maybe like your romantic life, and that's kind of attached to it, so it's a bit easier. When it's your gender identity, with your friends, that's a whole bunch of like how they see you as a person, whereas in your family, it's still difficult, but it doesn't feel as a major part of your social identity out in school. So I actually found it easier to talk to my immediate family about my gender when I was first coming out. And then, of course, I came out to a 60-person group at camp 2 summers ago. So that was a bit different.
A bigger going on.
Yeah, seriously, because otherwise I would have been in the girls' one for next summer anyway. But yeah, there really is a bit of a difference between your gender identity and coming out as that versus your sexuality.
I think there are things now that make it easier to find other LGBTQ people now, like just near you, because of because of GSA, or just looking for like inclusive places that advertise that. It's like, as an adult, it was so much easier than in high school. It just was. It's just, if you look for it, like, people want to feel a sense of community, and it's there, and it's not just in those places where it's obvious. It really is everywhere if you're open to looking for it. Yeah.
Just to sort of piggyback on that, on the parenting and the out question, what advice would you give to a parent if your child is struggling or questioning and that kind of thing, and they're really only sort of out to your immediate family, but you as a parent are also then having to deal and cope with the situation and are maybe struggling or just trying to cope.
P flag.
But is that really the only, you want to talk to your close friends, but you don't want to out your child in the conversation with your close friends who knows your child. You know what I mean? Like,
I am so glad that you care about that, because so many parents will say, like, this is my life, me experiencing your sexuality, so I'm going to tell my friends because this is my current life. So the fact that you're even mindful of this is very excellent.
Especially in a community like this where, let's say, your child's not out at school, but your friends all have kids at that school, and you don't necessarily want to have that conversation with your friends and have them over here, all of that. It's so tricky as a parenting this generation.
We want to have another parent who's like, wants to give this. Yeah, go ahead.
My
We'll
son
hear
is
from y'all.
33 now, but and he's a teacher. But one thing is, if you want to get brownie points with your kid, is just total unconditional respect for them and letting them lead the way. Stepping aside, just being an open door, it's the hardest thing. And it may feel like loss sometimes, and it may, but your child is here. If you know anyone who's actually lost a child, then your child is there. You can hug them, and hold them, and tell them that you love them. And the pronouns and all of that. It's the least we can do for our kids. It's the very least language. It's the very least we can do for our kids. And the rewards are exponential. I can tell you now. I mean, there's life after. There really is. And my son's going to get married to his. He's gay and he's trans and he's gay. He didn't have to be trans in order to date a guy, but he's found someone, and it's just watching this unfold and watching him blossom and unfold. It's just incredible. It's just so unbelievably rewarding, and we're tight. We're good, and he knows that I'm there for him, and it just and also. Can I just say, too, the rewards for us as parents are huge, because these children are teaching us, and a whole planet has opened up to me that was closed to me before, that I didn't know about, that exists here and now, and that I would have just been closed to because I was afraid. And for the longest time, I wouldn't read any books, and I wouldn't see. And my friends would say, "Have you seen that movie about the thing with the thing?" And I would go, "No, la 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 la." But it's that opening, and it's a process. But beginning with just respecting and totally just not telling your friends about your kid. Is such a sign of respect, and that will, the rewards, the reaping will happen.
And also asking them, like, who are you okay with
Totally.
me? Because they might say, like, oh yeah, of course you can tell, like, Cindy, like, that's fine. Or like, of course, like, that is a sign, even asking the question. They might say, no one for now, but they might surprise you too and say, oh, like, yeah, go for it, you know? So it doesn't have to be as much maybe tiptoeing as you might be doing. I mean, that's an assumption, but what do you guys think?
Ask before you tell your parents. I would have greatly appreciated it if my parent had asked on one occasion, but and it didn't have too many repercussions, but it still really would have been really nice if she had asked before she went and told a friend over brunch. So, seriously, chances are, if you have good friends, your child's going to say yes, but just it's a good level of trust to just ask first in any situation.
My personal advice for you, if I were in your situation, would definitely be first ask. And if you do end up asking, like, what I would say is, like, you know, how you're kind of dealing with this, like, you want to be supportive and you want to, you know, talk to people and, like, kind of explain why you want to talk to someone, so it's not, like, just gossip or, like, you know, you want to, like, complain about your child or something, which I'm sure you don't want to. But, like, so kind of your kid understands, like, why you want to do this. And if your child says no, then, you know, that's it, and you can say, I'd probably ask, like, when you are comfortable with it, could you let me know, because this would help me. But if your kid does say yes, maybe, again, like Tyler said, ask, like, who they're comfortable with, and maybe even when you ask, like, say, like, this is who I want to tell, and if there's somebody that you want to tell who doesn't have a kid who goes to school with your child, or, like, a family member that your kid knows, that would probably be more comfortable for them.
I don't want to be a broken record. Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about what you were saying as a parent of a child who came out. That one. I did. I'm not the poster child for the parent that did everything right. I made a lot of mistakes. She knows it. I know it. We've discussed it. We've gone through it. You didn't make any.
Yeah.
But one thing I think we did do well was we were careful about what we shared and who we shared out of respect for what she was ready for. And we did ask.
Every time.
Yeah.
It meant a lot.
We know we're going to see our best friends who, you know, we haven't seen in a while. Do you mind if we share this? This is something that's big that's happening with our family. You know, can we share this? And at one point, my mother was offended that I did not tell her that my child had come out until my child herself chose to come out. And that was something that we had to work through relationally. That I had to say, I'm sorry, I could not out her. That was something I had to wait for her to do. So, like I said, we made a lot of mistakes, but I think that one we did okay.
Oh, and just one little side note. If you're going to be telling your friends, make sure that you maybe tell them not to go around telling their kids or something like that. I hope that's a given, but just make sure that there's a level of confidentiality with your friend, because you don't know 100% that your friend's not going to go off telling more people. So it's good to have that extra layer of communication.
So as the aunt who receives the news from the sister, the mother of, what can you share any experiences or what would be helpful hearing from people who didn't hear it directly from you, but you know they know now, right? And we live miles apart, see each other maybe once or twice a year, and it's like, so I start, I practice the pronouns and I prepare, but at the same time, like, how much do you just say, okay, so I've heard this news, tell me about it? Or do you just act the way you've always acted, almost like you don't even know? So can you share any helpful hints there?
These are such amazing questions.
So I actually had a girl one time last semester in health class come up to me, and we were doing our unit on LGBT, and we were kind of doing like this exercise where there were two rings, like an outer one and an inner one, and the inner one kept rotating. And she got to my desk, and the first thing she said before we even talked about the assignment or anything was, "Hey, so you and your girlfriend are still dating, right?" And it was really kind of abrasive and uncomfortable, because it was like, first of all, I get that we're doing the LGBT unit, but she didn't need to bring that up. Like that, it was just kind of like really uncomfortable. So the way I reacted to that was I was just like, yeah, and I shut it down. Like I didn't talk about it or give her any more room, and I just kind of started talking about the assignment. So I think like from my experience that worked really well, because she didn't like do anything uncomfortable like that again. So it was like, it's awkward when someone does that, where it's like just out of the blue and you didn't tell them, you didn't know that they knew, and they just kind of bring it up. So I think the way like I dealt with it was comfortable for me. So like kind of finding what works for you is like.
Do they know that you know?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's helpful if they already know that the
Yeah.
person knows. It's kind of just like the first interaction
Yeah.
after.
Right, like they live states away,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
said, yeah, please tell my aunts, my uncles, and my grandparents. Like, you can tell them, let them know. But then you don't see them until summertime,
I think
months
she should
later.
say something.
So how do yeah.
Treat them like you've always treated them.
Yeah.
Use the right pronouns.
Yeah.
And just, they're not any different, but they've just opened up this part of you. And the best way to kind of acknowledge it, in my opinion, is just say, if there's anything I can do to like support you if you need anything, and just remind them, you know what, I still love you. My text from her mom that said, like, came out real sneaky over Instagram, let her follow me so I didn't have to have a conversation. Great passive. But she just texted me, and she just said, you know what, I just want you to know I always love you, and I always will. I didn't directly tell her. I mean, in a way, it wasn't like through another person, but it wasn't direct. And that just like huge weight that I felt lift off of me, and she's treated me the same ever since, aside of sometimes she'll just text me out of the blue and be like, love you. But it just having her tell me and reassure me that this isn't going to change how she's going to treat me, except for if I were changing my pronouns, it would probably be, oh, I'll work on it. Or, if there's anything specific, they're not different. They've just shared this part of you that they didn't share before.
I like the little added extra, and yeah, of course I'll let you speak, Todd. I like the little added extra piece of like, yes, I'm treating you the same, yes, I'm being respectful of your pronouns, but also or whatever the situation might be, but also that, like, I just want you to know that I love you, proud of you for being exactly who you are, and I'll be there for you. And please let me know if you need anything from me, because it's the weight that's lifted. Because if you were just like going in and you're using pronouns and that's it, then it's like, does my aunt like actually, like, does she mind, or does she feel forced to use the pronouns? Does she, like, there's so many questions, and you're just kind of alleviating the questions, I think.
As a trans person who has an aunt a couple states away, they live in the exact same situation, just on the other side. No, I got. She flew like another one. But yeah, everything that they just said is 100% true. I did come out to my aunt personally through FaceTime. My mom's gonna be mad at me for saying aunt. She likes it when I say aunt. When my aunt, I spoke to her on FaceTime first because I didn't want them to find out through like Facebook. But seriously, that just talking with your sibling's child is really just keeping up the communication and telling them that you love them is really just very helpful. Just making sure that they know that when you guys do finally see each other next time, that they know 100% that you're going to be supportive is really, really helpful. Like, I'm kind of nervous about going back to a situation with family members if I don't know that they're going to be 100% supportive. So just expressing that support is just going to help a whole lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, situations I'm fairly entrenched in this younger child who is 8 at the moment, so we're fully in the exploratory stage of transgender. This 8-year-old child has a 10-year-old sister who is similarly struggling with it, and in particular, sort of how to navigate with her friends and being, who's your brother or sister, and she doesn't want to lie because her dad is still with her. Lying is bad, but any advice on dealing with siblings and how to help them get through this as well, and have that supportive household.
So just to clarify, younger sibling questioning, and then, or is pretty certain, or still in the question? Okay.
It's I mean, she's pretty far along in the stage, so
Okay.
it's trending like it's for real, but she's 8,
Awesome.
so.
Yeah, no, but like you said, it's whatever it is, it's real, wherever, whatever's happening.
Correct.
And then the 10-year-old is not knowing whether to say brother or sister.
Yeah, supportive, wants to do what's right, but also is sort of trying to navigate her friend space and her social spheres and all this other stuff. So it's really hard for her to sort of try to
What's your 8-year-old saying?
upset. Want to sort of support her being who she's trying to be, not who she has always been.
Right.
The last few years, so it's hard to say.
So so the 8-year-old wants to be called, like, call me your younger sister.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I don't know, I'm asking you.
No, this is a
it's
tough.
tough. I mean, because I
Absolutely.
it's because if it's permanent and it's ready to be, I want her to be on the same page and have her be loved by everybody. But at the same time, like, they got to kind of figure it out themselves, and I don't want to be like the overbearing dad who's.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
it's a really, like, the sibling thing is really as difficult as dealing with the situation itself.
I always wish there were more gender-neutral options than, like, my
Brother,
child, or
Yeah.
brother, sister, or
Sibling.
sibling. Like, I would.
I'm going to use the are you a boy or girl? No. I'm going to say,
No,
say
yeah.
brother or sister? No.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, I think that your 10-year-old could say sibling. Is your 10-year-old having, like, are they like,
they love each other. Again, if there's 2 of them, they get along great. She's super supportive. The issue comes up with, is that a boy or a girl? It's I mean, it's 10,
like,
10
is your
years.
sibling a boy or a girl?
Yes,
Is your
10
sibling
years, is that a boy or a girl?
Yeah.
Like, who is that?
Yeah.
Like,
Thoughts,
what's the
feel,
answer to that? That sort of
The advice I would probably give is like, so it's like that kind of like in-betweenness that is like difficult. So what I do when I'm like trying to explain to some people like sexuality is I'm like, well, do you like cake? Do you like pie? Do you like both? I like both. So sometimes it's like, if it's like, oh, well, like you can use like analogies kind of like that to like, oh, well, like apples have seeds, and it was an apple at one point, and then it's an apple tree, or like something like that, to show like the change and transition, to explain what once was and what now is. That could also change in the future, would probably be my best advice. I don't know.
I think it also goes back to what you were saying before about this idea of permanence. So right now you're saying I identify as bisexual, and I'm acknowledging that there is the small percentage that could evolve or that could change. If your child, if your daughter is this is how I want to present in the world, I would say if that feels right for your daughter, even though they're 8 right now, and your and her sister's friends say, "Is that a boy or a girl?" Say, "Girl." They're not gonna. I don't think they're gonna, like, 3 years from then, if it doesn't end up panning out that way, be like, "I remember he lied." And it's like there's more of a I think that, like, as your older daughter gets older, there can be more of a conversation like that was an exploratory piece, you know. And if it feels okay for you, if it feels okay for them, that I think would be the most validating thing.
Yeah, I think so. The age works both ways because they're so young that they're sort of, you're just going with what they see, and there's no awkwardness, and the kids are all accepting, and it doesn't really.
They don't think about it. Like, they don't, like, I think the kids just want an answer.
Yeah, they're so
Boys and girls basketball,
Yeah.
But
They just want an answer, and then they move on. They're like, "Oh, okay." It's, you know, I think it's more turmoil for you than it really is for any of them, and probably for your older daughter right now, but, you know, say, okay, this is trending this way, this is how this person is expressing themselves. Again, this person's not in front of me, obviously I have not, like, met your child or.
Yeah, are there resources for siblings specifically, or anything like that?
Siblings specifically, there's gotta be. I would also, like, go to PFLAG, because most of the parents at PFLAG are parents of trans kids. So, like, understanding how they navigated with their other children too would be so super helpful. But nothing comes, like, immediately to mind, but there definitely has to be, like, resources for siblings of trans, you know, siblings coming out. Like, there has to be. I would be so surprised if that didn't exist.
You might also look at, I think Hartford Hospital and Institute for Living, right, have units for transgender children and teens, and they may have support groups.
Yeah, they might have support groups too.
True Colors.
Yeah, looking through the True Colors resource guide, it's huge. It's this enormous resource guide. So they might have support groups in there for siblings. That's a great idea, yeah, absolutely.
So I hate to interrupt, but, because this has been wonderful, but we have to end.
Yeah.
Before we end, I mean, of course, I want to thank Michaela Scully from Silver Hill
Thank you for
Hospital.
having me.
This is our first time in going Facebook Live, and there were several comments that came through that I was monitoring, and they were commenting on how wonderful this was, and how wonderful it was to see the RHS kids, and how accepting, how pleased they were that.
I'm recruiting them for all of my presentations. Can you guys follow my presentations?
Let's go on the road.
We're going on the road. After.
So thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, and for your great questions and your bravery with your questions. That is also huge. Thank you.
Also, I'm so sorry, I just want to say, like, as, like, an LGBT teen, it means so much that, like, none of you guys are my parents, but it means so much that you guys are parents and that you did come out tonight. Like, just knowing that you guys, like, did this, it means a lot to me.
Oh.